efforts in the development of the scientific, educational, and youth cooperation clearly testifies to the fact that our Western opponents and our unfriendly regimes trying to cancel Russia and exclude it from the global processes are ready to politicize any area, education, culture, or sports. And I will remind you, I remind Brussels and all those who are trying to following its will, you don't have a monopoly in those avenues. You have lost it. You even lost your leadership positions in that area. You cannot dictate anything to anyone. We are convinced that the destructive policy of the European Union in those areas of international cooperation will turn out to hurt them in the end. As I said, the same goes for all sanctions that unfortunately impacted the residents of the European Union and the number of international events organized in our country. It is obvious that the restrictions against us cannot slow down the Russian education and science. Now to another topic, the situation in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The level of violence in Gaza is not decreasing. The catastrophic volumes of the humanitarian disaster are worrying. The number of killed and wounded Palestinians is in the tens of thousands. According to the WHO, 70% of fatalities are among women and children. At this backdrop, on the 11th of January, on the initiative of the United Arab Emirates, there was an informal trip of representatives of current and new members of the UN Security Council to Egypt, to the border crossing Rafah at the border with the Gaza Strip. And the permanent representative of Russia at the UN in New York, Vasily Nebenza, took part in that trip. The delegation visited the border crossing, the logistical center, hospital in El Arish in Egypt, and also visited the desalination stanchion. They also met the Egyptian officials and members of the UN specialized agencies, members of humanitarian NGOs. They also video conference with the workers of the hospital of United Arab Emirates within the Strip. And the trip allowed everyone to learn about the efforts to help the affected population of the Gaza Strip and to witness the catastrophic situation within this enclave. It is worth noting that representatives of the United States, France, and Albania, as you might guess, refused to participate in the trip. We would like to highlight the necessity of an immediate ceasefire in the Gaza Strip and de-escalation situation in the West Bank. This will allow us to avoid new casualties among the peaceful population and will allow for full assistance to the Palestinians. We need to pursue this goal in cooperation with our partners. On the 18th of December in Moscow, there was a final batch of Russians and Palestinians evacuated from the Gaza Strip. We're talking about members of families in Palestine evacuated to Russia, and for a total of 73 people. In the Moldova, the MFA team helped them in coming through the border, migration, and sanitary cordons. According to the order of the President of the Russian Federation, the Russian diplomatic missions in Cairo, Tel Aviv, and Ramallah, and relevant agencies of the EMERCOM and the MFA and other agencies ensured safe crossing through the Rafah border crossing to the territory of Egypt of almost all Russians and their relatives, who have asked to help them to get them out of the zone of conflict. The planes of the EMERCOM evacuated more than 1.1 thousand people. According to the decision of the Russian president, the operative group of the EMERCOM has finalized its actions in Egypt and returned to Moscow. The work on possible applications of Russians who are in according to different reasons, remain in the Gaza Strip will be continued on an individual basis, including those who have permissions to cross the Rafah border crossing. We are thankful for our Egyptian, Israeli, Palestinian, and Qatar partners for their assistance in those evacuation events. I can't but comment on the statement of the Vice President for the International Olympic Committee, Juan Antonio Samaranch Jr., on the admission of the Russian athletes to participate in the Olympics in Paris. He said that allegedly there was a painful but a just balance found in situation with the Russian and Belarusian athletes. We have an obvious question: what conditions for this balance were achieved? What justice can be talked about when, according to the recent information of the International Olympic Committee, this Olympics only admitted 6 Russian athletes? And I remind you, at the previous Winter Olympics in Beijing in 2022, there were 212 athletes in the Russian team, and in the Tokyo in the summer 2021 there were 336. Against the backdrop of the worldwide acceptance of Russia as a great sporting power, this causes our befuddlement. This bureaucracy of the International Olympic Committee is just puzzling. For the European resident, the expression of admission of athlete could be reinforcing, could be emboldening, but this is an unprecedented discrimination of the International Olympic Committee, and according to the demands, the Russian athletes should act in neutral or individual capability, rejecting their national affiliation. What about justice now and balance when it comes to that? It has nothing in common with the situation with Russian athletes. We think that sports and sports competitions are a unique instrument of developing social ties and building mutually respectful conversation, that it is brought to reunite people. So now Russia is consequently standing for the development of international sporting cooperation based on principles of equality and non-discrimination, ensuring equal access for all countries to the sporting events. For how many years we've experienced this unjust situation? And in reality, this is not even injustice. This is another term: anti-justice. This is not just non-compliance with the standards of justice. This is just a culmination. It's a creation of a new normal out of this injustice, anti-justice. We call on all sensible representatives of the world sporting scene to adhere to those simple and obvious approaches which were enshrined in the basis of the development of the World Olympic movement. The very principles I just mentioned, reuniting, encompassing, and creative principles, and not destructive and disruptive principles. On the 18th of December, we are once again celebrating the International Migrants Day. The establishment of this Memorial Date is linked to the adoption of the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their families, which is entered into force in 2003. The participants, there are 70 countries participating in that treaty, mainly the countries of origin of migrants, primarily from Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Russia joined the consensus on the resolution of the UN General Assembly Resolution 55/93 of 4th December 2000, which has proclaimed this International Migrants Day to improve the mechanism of managing migration flows. International community has tried to elaborate a universal document without any legally binding character. In 2018, the UN General Assembly approved the Global Compact for safe and orderly and legal immigration. Russia supported the adoption of this compact, and Hungary, Israel, Poland, the United States, and the Czech Republic were against it, and the 12 countries abstained. Russia is committed to the constructive cooperation in the area of migration, which is proven by our country's accession to the International Organization for Migration 2021. This is the biggest intergovernmental structure associated with the UN, which is specializing on the migration issues. We've talked about it during today's briefing, and Now about the horrible crime against freedom. As you know, on the 16th of December, the Council of the Bulgarian National Radio prohibited the publication of an already recorded interview of the Russian ambassador to Bulgaria, Eleonora Mitrofanova, which, among others, mentioned the barbaric destruction of the memorial to the Soviet army in the center of Sofia. There was also a mentioning. The interview also mentioned answers to the questions of journalists and not some pre-recorded talking points. There were comments on the special military operation and other topics and bilateral cooperation within our countries and the regional and international agenda mentioned in the speech. There was also some mentioning of sanctions. Bulgaria is also introducing sanctions against Russia. Why are they not allowing to publicize an interview detailing how Russia is handling those sanctions? The decision to prohibit the broadcast under the political pressure is a shameful act of censorship, and immediately they were trying to look for some justification to evade responsibility for this act of censorship and their self-censorship. In fact, they're trying to extract some letters, some words in the context which allowed them to prohibit the publication interview. This is hypocrisy of the highest order of the Bulgarian political leadership and the forces behind it, which claim and brag about their adherence to the freedom of speech and are trying to teach every continent in the world how they should build democracy and journalism and how to give interviews. But in reality, they are trying to clean up their information space from any opinions outside the pattern of the Euro-Atlantic propaganda. The Director General of the Bulgarian National Radio, Milan Mitev, explained the prohibition of this interview that it as not matching the editorial standards. The person who was asked questions should answer according to the prearranged talking points or what, or every guest in the Bulgarian National Radio is given instructions describing high standards of this media source. Attempts to silence the truth and to debate the objective historical process linked with the weakening of the global influence of the West are doomed to failure.
Я также хочу сказать, что в Болгарии сохраняются действительно независимые СМИ, которые отстаивают принципы плюрализма мнений.
We see that every day that concerned Bulgarian citizens can always find information on some independent news sources. And I'll tell you why there wasn't. They didn't give the opportunity to publish the interview of Madam Mitrofanova, that's because the political leadership of Bulgaria is less popular among the Bulgarian people than Eleonora Mitrofanova. That's the real reason, because she was talking based on the facts. She knows history. She is not afraid to speak the truth. She's doing that respectful with people of Bulgaria and the history of the Bulgarian people. She has an authority among the people who are basing their statements on real data and not propaganda materials that are being fed to them for a long time and are prepared in Brussels or in NATO laboratories. That's why they canceled this interview. If they weren't afraid of her authority and her knowledge, they wouldn't have cancelled it in a lifetime. And if they had something that they could disavow in her interview, on the contrary, they would do anything to distribute this interview, to laugh at it, or publish any comments that would disprove the facts. But there was nothing to disavow. There was nothing to discard. There was not a single word of lies said in this interview, and that's the political leadership of Bulgaria, which is professing this anti-Russian logic espoused by the West, understands that it will be pushed against the wall with this interview, that they will have no documents to disprove or discredit the interview of Eleonora Mitrofanova. That's why they cancelled it. There are no other reasons for it. And for some history, in September 1943, the Red Army managed to inflict a heavy defeat against the enemy in the left bank of the Dnieper and in Donbass, in the regions of important economic character for the country. But the enemy continued to resist fiercely along the entire front. There was heavy fighting, and the Soviet troops, Soviet forces, was tasked to extend the main footholds and to hold the pressure to liberate the right bank of Ukraine and Crimea. On the 26th of December, the Soviet forces began the Lower Dnieper strategic operation under the command of Ivan Konyev, Rodion Malinovsky, and Fyodor Tolbukhin. The offensive was conducted without preliminary preparation, and the tasks were distributed during the continuous warfare. The Soviet side used more than 1.5 million soldiers, 25,000 artillery pieces and mortars, and 1,000 tanks and self-propelled guns. And they were opposed by the 1st Panzer Armies, the 8th Field Army of the Army Group South, numbering 70,000 people, 8,000 artillery pieces and mortars, 800 tanks and assault guns, and 1,000 planes. Towards the middle of October, they destroyed the Zaporozhye outpost of the enemy. They liberated Melitopol, Dnepropetrovsk, Dneprodzerzhinsk. On the 1st of November, they breached the defense near the Turkish rampart and the Isthmus of Perekop. They've crossed the Sivash Lake. And on the 20th of December, the entire west bank of the Dnieper was completely cleared of the enemy. During the Lower Dnieper offensive operation, the Soviet forces advanced more than 800 kilometers and liberated the left bank of Ukraine in the lower Dnieper. And they blocked the Crimea grouping of the German and Romanian forces. And the further success was achieved during the Dnieper-Carpathian strategic offensive operation, which eventuated in the expulsion of the enemy from Ukraine and the transmission of military action of the Soviet forces to the territory of Romania. I'm ready to answer your questions. International Affairs, are you with us? How could you comment on the information that arrived in the media that, according to the Latvian Office of Citizenship, signed themselves to this exam, the language exam, are prescribed to voluntarily leave the territory of this Baltic state.
Today, more than 1,000 of our compatriots living in Latvia might fall under this requirement, but it's not a final figure because the migration service continues to process all the documents of Russians and check their information with the database of the Latvian Border Service. And quite soon, the number of Russian citizens who failed to acquire legal status within the established timeline might increase. And this category of persons retains the right to appeal the decision of the Migration Service in a pre-trial and in the court procedure, but their term of stay might be automatically extended if they have decided to appeal. Moreover, if there are valid reasons like a health condition, the need to care for sick relatives, and sale of the property, they can ask for the deferment for 1 year. However, it does not cancel these draconian plans of Riga that are related to the nationalist policy of this country. According to the human rights advocates, those Russian citizens who haven't completed the filtration procedures have already received letters to pay a visit to the Migration Service until January 10th, 2024, to receive and to sign the official notice of expulsion. After acquiring this document, this person is obliged to leave the Latvian territory within 30 days. I'm going to tell you about the political work that we'll continue to conduct, and I would like to mention the main thing. Due to the possible deportations of Russian citizens from Latvia, our agencies and regions were instructed to help them with accommodation, employment, retirement benefit, etc. I want them to know about it. If the Latvian regime decides to take barbaric action against Russian citizens, then we will work for the international community to condemn it. But it's not enough, certainly, and we will take additional measures of influence in addition to those that have put this Baltic country and population in a distressful situation. We won't leave our citizens behind, and we won't let them be harassed by these authorities. And another question: how could you comment the statement of the Moldovan Prime Minister that the Russia's decision to simplify for Moldovan citizens the procedure for acquiring the Russian citizenship is an attempt to recruit cannon fodder for the Kremlin's war against Ukraine? I don't know. I think they are ended up in the logical dead end. They are making worse the life of their citizens, and they're doing their best to make their population suffer, and they humiliate the decency of their people by depriving their right to speak their own language. And when they see how other countries are helping their citizens and their compatriots, it's really what makes them angry. I would say that these are animal instincts, but I wouldn't like to insult animals. We see that Russophobia is taking more grotesque forms. And people, how can people who make such statements in Moldova, how can they explain the fact that citizens of Moldova can easily apply for Romanian citizenship? The majority of Moldovan citizens are highly sympathetic towards Russia, and they see it as a good place for studying, working, treatment, and just in general for their own future. And it is not coincidence that the Moldovan diaspora in Russia is about several hundred thousand people. Moving forward, Media Corporation of China, please. Hello, Ms. Zakharova. We have only one question. In the beginning of this week, the United States and Finland have signed a defense deal, which means gaining access to some facilities. And earlier, the same contract was signed between Sweden and the United States. So the United States can be on the 17 military bases of Sweden. So what's behind NATO's actions led by the United States, and how can we affect the situation in the region in the future? We have commented it yesterday, and the Finnish ambassador in Moscow was summoned to the Russian Foreign Ministry, and we announced that he is responsible for turning the area of good neighborliness in this region into the area of possible confrontation. It's not our choice. We would like to develop good neighborly relations with Finland, and everyone understands it. I would like to highlight that what's going on today is what we have been warning about from the very beginning. Now Washington controls the region. They're responsible for the military development of territories of the new two member states of NATO. At the same time, Sweden is not yet an official member of alliance, and their goals are inconsistent with the interests of indigenous people and national interests of these countries. They are taking action with impunity. They are acting without any control on the territories of these states, and they're increasing the military potential in the once peaceful region. Is it required for the Finnish, for the Swedish people? They don't need it, but it is imposed on them, and we will take every effort to protect our national security interests. Thank you. Izvestia, please. Hello. Anton Zolotnitsky, Izvestia. We have two questions. First, taking the situation in the Red Sea and Suez Canal, is Russia going to offer the Northern Sea route as an alternative and safe route to its Russian partners? The conflict in the Gaza Strip is escalating, and the situation with safe navigation in the Red Sea is getting worse, which again makes it relevant to diversify sea routes, including the deliveries through the Northern Sea route, which is the shortest route from Europe to Asia. Just let's look at the statistics. 11 out of 17 largest ports are in Asia. Experts say up to 40% of the global economy will be carried out in India and China. The Northern Sea route has been functioning actively. 2022, thousands of authorizations were provided to the ships for navigation in the Northern Sea route. Only 31 applications were denied. And usually, we denied the navigation to the ships with the Russian flag. The relevant agencies are taking all the necessary steps to ensure the safe navigation along the Northern Sea route, and Russia, as a literal state, is paying a lot of attention to the function of the Northern Sea route, and we'll do our best to ensure the safe navigation and with the careful attitude towards the environment and in line with all the documents that regulate navigation along the entire Northern Sea route. Thank you. And the second question, Erdogan stated that Turkey is ready to revitalize the Istanbul process on the Ukrainian settlement. And did you receive any signals from Turkey, and how viable the idea is? I think that these messages should be sent to a country that has banned itself any negotiations with Russia. We have made statements and expressed our positions with regard to the issue so many times. If Ankara wants to stimulate Ukraine towards a peace process, they can do that. Any initiative that is pursuing this goal should be welcomed. But the problem is that it was blocked by Kyiv, and it was cemented later by Washington and London, so that they wouldn't stop the escalation, so that they wouldn't have to draw down military supplies, so they wouldn't have to allocate less funds for this violent and terrible war. We understand that this is a bloody and terrible project, the conflict in Ukraine that is unfolding today. Sputnik News, please. Hello, we have two questions. Speaking about Moldova, speaking to Pro TV, Maya Sandu stated that, in her opinion, in spring, Russia will prepare new attempts to destabilize the situation in country. And will such statements help Moldova to get a ticket to the EU? It's weird and even ridiculous to hear to the person who is the head of state and who has a passport of another country about interference in domestic affairs in the country that she is governing. It sounds like bipolar disorder. These are preposterous allegations of Russia, and we are getting tired of them. They are regularly made by Moldovan authorities. Will respond to them, but it turns into a disease. Even it was even stated by the Moldovan citizens. This anti-Russian logic has several dimensions. They are destabilizing their domestic situation, their stability in our bilateral relations is not needed by the current authorities of Moldova. Also, they are trying to justify their miscalculations and their failure to deliver on pre-election promises, and they are trying to make Russia or Kremlin responsible for that. We see that the credibility rating is falling, and the Moldovan authorities are trying to find a pretext, a story why such situation is happening. Will it happen? Will these anti-Russian statements help Moldova to have a ticket to the EU? Is a big question. It's not legally binding decision of Brussels, as it was stated by French President Macron following the European Union summit. It's not a legally binding decision, as he said. It's not a legally binding. It's not a legal decision. It's a political move. That's what President Macron stated. Negotiation process might take years, might be accompanied with new requirements, new recommendations, with no result. Many countries have been in these negotiations for years, for decades. They have fulfilled and met all the requirements, but yet they are denied to join the EU. And today is the International Day of Solidarity of People that is celebrated at the UN initiative. Today, UN reminds governments of their country that they should respect their commitments when it comes to international agreements. In your opinion, what commitments were violated by countries this year? I recall about the document and the goal of establishing this day. We're talking about the International Day of Solidarity with People, which was established by the UN General Assembly resolution in 2006 in order to foster the culture of solidarity in eliminating poverty. The resolution noted that one of the fundamental universal values that should be the basis of international relations in the 21st century is solidarity. And this day, among other things, this truly should serve as a reminder for governments that they should respect their commitments assumed under international agreements. But it's in theory. In practice, Western states have coined the concept of rules-based world order that they are trying to use to disguise their illegal behavior. At every briefing, and even at this briefing, we have been talking about the violations of norms of international law that they have committed. Regardless of these international days, Russia is committed to international law. We believe that the concept of rules-based world order is aimed to replace the international law and is an attempt to disguise the illegal behavior of the collective West. So therefore, Russia is building its domestic and foreign policy on generally recognized principles and norms of international law, and we urge every state to respect them. Another agency, please. Hello. We have 4 questions for you. The first question, since you've mentioned France, we have a question about France. The French newspaper Le Monde has wrote an article that Moscow, under the guidance of the Ministry of Defense, is trying to update its presence in Africa, and that's why Wagner was reorganized into Corps of Africa. What's your comment about it? You know, in our legislation, we didn't have the term private military company, and those countries who recruit Russian specialists in the area of security are doing that on a private basis. I think mass media should be reminded about that. And the next question. White House spokesperson John Kirby yesterday stated that the United States is concerned over have voiced their concern to the Israeli authorities over the incidents with the deaths of the civilian population. Also, he stated that the murder of civilians in Gaza is not in Israel plans. They are not deliberately killing civilians. Who said that? Once again, Kirby. I think it was said by a person who has no understanding, or he had an understanding but lost it, has no understanding of humanism, decency, consciousness. That might be the only explanation of why he's saying that. Could you please provide the general assessments of the U.S. position on Gaza, since they vetoed another resolution on ceasefire, and taking also into account the fact that Defense Secretary of the United States has recently visited Israel? You know, I'm not talking about the American people. I'm not talking about ordinary Americans, and I'm not talking about those who are of Middle Eastern origin, who are trying to study and to explore the Middle East. I'm talking about the political elites, about Joe Biden administration, and about the group of politicians who has been ruling the White House, State Department, and other American agencies for 3 terms in a row, because the same people worked under Barack Obama administration and the same people are working under Joe Biden presidency. The foreign policy has been the same for so many years. So when you ask what are our assessments on the U.S. position on the situation in Gaza, taking into account the fact that the United States vetoed the resolution on ceasefire in Gaza, I think their position, the position of the American establishment, American leadership as the anti-Semitic position. Everything that the United States is doing is aimed against both Israelis and Palestinians, and it results into the deaths of both Israelis and Palestinians, and it leads to the escalation of crisis in the Middle East, not de-escalation of the situation, but it leads to the worsening of the general situation, and it leads to the emergence of risks in the region that might have fatal results.
Thank you very much. And the last question. The ministry has already published the comments in response to the last package of sanctions introduced by the European Union. There is a new rule, no Russia clause. Is Russia planning to introduce a new rule in response to this no Russia clause? If someone is getting sick near you, probably you should help this person, give him some medicine, and you should protect yourself. You should not act as a person who deliberately contaminates himself. This is about health, physical, mental health. This is about the absence of logic, of moral, ethnic aspects. This is a Russophobian policy of the European Union. We talked a lot about this today, and the reason is not the willingness of the citizens of the European Union to damage Russia and to damage themselves. No. This is an external concept which is being imposed upon them by Washington, by London, and by their politicians, by the policies of different international structures, the concept of exacerbating of the relationships and the situation in the European continent. So you shouldn't act as them. We must not be those who we oppose, no matter whether it is a country or a culture or some traditions. This is not our history and our culture. No matter how we perceive this, we oppose to this. We stand against this, and we will do our utmost in order to protect us and to resist these negative phenomena like nationalism, for example. We are ready to condemn this, to reject this, to fight this. We stand against segregation and other manifestations of nationalism, like, for example, illegal activities. But we never oppose to the peoples, to the countries themselves. But unfortunately, this nationalist ideology is spreading more and more within the European community. So I think you mean not only the slogan itself, the clause itself. I think that you mean the banner of so-called sensitive production of the European Union. Brussels will try to expand this list to disrupt our economic ties, to damage our economy, to damage our relationships with our partners, with our colleagues, including Turkey. But we are sure that as the previous attempts of the European Union, this will make their burden even heavier and disrupt their economic capacity. So I think this is it. Thank you very much. So is Moscow Post here? Good morning. We have 3 questions. One about the recent agreement with Finland and the USA. Washington will get an access to 15 military bases on the territory of Finland. Can it influence the willingness of Russia to resume the negotiations with the USA on strategic stability? Well, the issue of this agreement on the defense cooperation was already mentioned and discussed within the foreign ministry, and I think that we have nothing to add because we explored this in details. Thank you very much. Then my next question. Could you tell me how many schools within the CIS teach the Russian language? In total, within the CIS, there are about 8,500 schools who teach in Russian, and about 2,700 schools are situated in Belarus. These are mixed schools. These are schools with so-called Russian classes. And if we compare the statistics from one country to another, I think that every school, every structure is particular, has its own characteristics, but we see a growing demand on the Russian language in different educational structures. For example, in 2022, in 5 Russian Tajiki schools in Tajikistan, during the years 2022-2023, there were 4,800 students. In the joint school between Russia and Turkmenistan, there were 1,125 students who studied the Russian language. On the 29th of March 2023, we concluded an agreement with the government and the Ministry of and the cabinet ministers of the Kyrgyz Republic about the creation of joint educational organizations, and we will build schools in Bishkek, Batken, and Karakol. The issue of the creation of Russian schools in the CIS countries is being examined by our ministries and other counterparts. And the last question, is Russia planning to evacuate the Russian compatriots from Lebanon? Excuse me, if you have any additional questions regarding particular countries or particular projects, I will be glad to answer you individually, so you should send these more precise questions. Thank you very much. So the third question, is Russia planning to evacuate the Russian compatriots from Lebanon, including diplomatic representatives of diplomatic missions? And how do you estimate the risk of the escalation of the conflict in Lebanon? So we are doing our utmost in order to prevent the future escalation and hostilities in the region. The situation on the border between Lebanon and Israel is directly linked with the situation in the Gaza Strip, and several days of the humanitarian pause in the Gaza Strip proved our estimations. Because in the south of Lebanon and on the north of Israel, the situation was calm. The key to the stabilization is the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas and resolving political and humanitarian problems. We called upon every parties concerned to follow these principles. Thank you very much. Verelk is here. Good morning, Ms. Zakharova. I have two questions. First, I would ask you to comment on the Joseph Borrell's declaration regarding the list, the Armenia and Azerbaijan in the list and their disappearance from this list. Well, we noticed that these countries were included in this list, but later they disappeared magically from this list of third countries. Well, it would be better to transfer this question to the European
различными версиями своих документов.
Tricksters. As for our opinion, I would like to say that all the attempts made by the European Union to give their declarations the form of international rules regarding the third parties are futile and futureless attempts. These restriction measures made by the European Union in bypassing of the norms of the UN Charter and international law are futureless. This is a good example of a neocolonial thinking of Brussels and the fact that the Western community headed by Washington under the auspices of Brussels wants from these countries and from this interference into the process of the normalization of the relationships between the countries. Their acts have nothing to do with the real process of normalization of relationships between the countries. This is just a desire to occupy another anti-Russian position, to occupy these anti-Russian positions close to our borders. And this has nothing to do with those efficient, positive things produced by the Russian Federation. The attempts of the European Union to oppose Russia include even the falsifications. I really wish everybody who is concerned to fight against this hypocrisy of NATO and of Washington. The capitals do not accept these restrictions, do not welcome these restrictions. This is a blatant violation of international law, I reiterate. I would like to comment on the declarations made by this is a blatant violation of international law, I reiterate. I would like to comment on the declarations made by Azerbaijan recently. Sorry, Armenia. Well, the Armenian Prime Minister will accept the invitation of Mr. Putin. He will visit St. Petersburg and will participate at the meeting of the Eurasian Economic Council meeting, and he will touch upon all these issues. As for our position regarding the normalization of relationships between Armenia and Azerbaijan, our foreign minister, our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the administration of our president mentioned that on manifold occasions, and we are ready to solve all the issues in a calm, friendly atmosphere. Thank you very much. Is Reiter here? Good evening. Good evening. Well, I would like to ask you, in the beginning of your briefing, you mentioned that Mr. Lavrov will visit a lot more countries after his visit to Morocco, that Mr. Lavrov will continue visiting other countries, and you promised to go into details. Well, I will not reveal you all the details. Okay, thank you. The second question, we touched upon this issue. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is been exacerbating, and now it's spread to the Red Sea. The USA are planning to conduct an operation there with the fleet of the countries, of the counterparts. So what Russia needs to do in order to settle this situation? So what should we do in order to end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Yes, and to stop it spreading to the other countries in the Middle East. Well, this is a very difficult question, and probably it's our competence. Well, our position is very coherent. We don't change it, take it into consideration different circumstances. We build our position basing on the fundamental principles, which are the interests of the population of this region, the interests of peaceful coexistence of peoples who for a long time in their history have been on war, and basing on this principle, we are trying to deal with this issue. We do not have a roadmap yet, but we take into consideration the decisions made by the UN, and many of these principles have already been implemented thanks to the quartet facilitators. This is a way to normalize the relationships. This was first discussed within the UN. This was fixed in the Security Council resolutions, the UN General Assembly resolutions, but everything was blocked by unilateral activities of the USA. They substituted legally binding norms of the settlement of the situation in the Middle East as a whole. They substituted all this with their dominance. This was a platform for them to promote their own vision of the situation. They got rid of everyone, of the facilitators quartet. They promised a lot of things to Israel, their strategic partner. They guaranteed security. They solved this issue bypassing the UN Security Council. They provided financial support, which led to the catastrophe. And this is part of my answer to your question. One country, which is not part of this region, which takes the functions of a so-called regulator of international relationships. Well, this concept is an obstacle to the de-escalation of the situation in a long-term perspective and in a short-term perspective. So we must understand, Mr. Lavrov mentioned that we need to elaborate additional legal basis because the countries of the region were not part of the facilitators quartet. We must expand this instrument. Regional leaders must participate at this interest, and we must preserve the formula of the two-state solution with the capital of both countries in East Jerusalem. We have that formula, but we are impeded not by the absence of political will of Washington, but the absence of political will in their vision of this situation in the region.
Thank you very much. Going on, news.ru. Yes, good evening. Can you hear me? We have 3 questions. First one, there are pro-West sentiments growing in Serbia, and activists of pro-Western parties are trying to forcibly influence the outcome of elections. For example, during the recent municipal elections and the parliament elections. How does the MFA evaluate the situation? What are the prospects in building our relations with Serbia in this regard? Primarily, I would like to talk about the fact that Russian observers participated in monitoring the elections to the People's Skupština of Serbia, and the voting at the level of the autonomous region of Vojvodina, the city of Belgrade, and some municipalities on December 17. The participants of the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation, the Parliamentary Assembly of CSTO, the Central Elective Commission of the Russian Federation, experts of the MFA of Russia stated that the electors expressed their will according to the law, international standards. According to preliminary data, 60% of 140 places in the People's Skupština were gained by the Serbian Progressive Party and its primary coalition partner, the Socialist Party of Serbia. This testifies to the broad support of the government among the citizens of Serbia. I would like to also mention that in Belgrade, in Serbia, and in some broader context in the Balkans, there are some scenarios applied of the so-called Maidan pushing of Western will. And the so-called manifestations, which are not really manifestations, but just a congregation of people in the streets to reach goals which are contrary to democratic processes, sometimes direct bribery, promotion of Western interest through anti-constitutional contradictions which are contrary to the law. This testifies to the fact that the desire to spread the Maidan to the Balkans exists, and there's a lot of it. What this will lead to, we just need to look to the example of Ukraine as a good example of what not to do, and not for the people, not for the state. The Serbians will handle themselves, I think, because they clearly see where the West has led Ukraine, and they clearly remember what the West did to Serbia itself and to the entire Balkan region. But since you asked me, any people of any country must protect their sovereignty on any level. And this should be a part of the civil position, the protection of sovereignty and national interests. Thank you. My second question concerns the fact that the Pope recently allowed giving blessings to single-sex couples. How could this be reflected in the relations between Russia and Vatican, considering our dedication to traditional values? I think that this is an intra-church question of Vatican. Perhaps you would be best to ask them this question. We, of course, noticed that the very document underlined that the doctrinal bases of the Catholic faith have not been changed. But I would like to mention once again that we view it as an intra-church process in the Vatican. And we hope that this decision will not influence the Russian-Vatican interaction, which is currently very constructive and mutually respectful, including in the context of our joint work to settle some humanitarian issues regarding the Ukrainian crisis. Our position on this issue is very well known. It is mentioned in the order of the present Russian Federation on the adoption of the basis of the state policy in the preservation and promotion of moral values. I think that everyone is familiar with that. I think you are familiar with it too. So for us, this issue has only a legal dimension. Thank you. My third question. Germany started redeploying a tank brigade to Lithuania. This process has already started. What threats does it mean for Russia, and how would this influence our relations with Lithuania and Germany? Mr. Pistorius, who is the Minister of Defense of Germany, and called those agreements historical. I don't know what type of history he would like to remind Lithuania of. There are a lot of similarities with the 30s and the 40s of the past century. Germany tried to take up those responsibilities on the deployment of military personnel and military equipment up to 2027, with the creation of conditions of necessary infrastructure by the Lithuanian side, and this is all going together with existing plans of NATO. There's also a tactical group of the alliance presided by Germany and Lithuania already. So this testifies to the fact that there's a growing military infrastructure of the West on the eastern borders with the coordination of the alliance, and this is a fact of hypocrisy when we are accused of so-called aggressive subversive activity at the border of the NATO, but when the NATO borders are just extending toward us from the West, and there are the number of munitions and military equipment is growing, and there are bellicose statements and intentions coupled with the growing number of military potential on our border. This, of course, leads to escalation. This escalates the military tensions on our side. We will take into account the military tensions of the alliance in our military planning. One more thing. What does the Lithuanian people think about this? Do they understand what's the exact nature of this? They left the Soviet Union just because they wanted to be free, independent. They didn't want to become an exchange coin and being submitted to someone. This is no comparison with the situation in the Soviet Union, the current situation. There was a central authority that was trying to develop the national culture, the history, and the industry, science, education in Lithuania. And now what's going on? They are just being used just as they were using Ukraine, just as they were using other spots on the map in the interest. Who in Germany is developing science in Lithuania? Who in Germany thinks about the education of Lithuanian children and youth for it to develop in any areas? Who in Germany develops and improves the culture in Lithuania? No, they're only growing their military potential and then turning Lithuania into a military platform for German military. Thank you very much. Further on is Radio Saga with us right now. Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me? Good afternoon to everyone. Radio Saga from Islandia. The year of 2023 was rich in its events, and then regarding your ministry and the diplomatic work of Russia, what were the brightest, both positive and negative, cheerful and sad moments of this year, in your opinion? I think that every member of our ministry, every official, has his own opinion of this, and I'll try to respond both in personal capacity and try to accumulate some sort of our internal attitudes, etc. I think everyone will have their own opinion, but for me personally, I would like to highlight the adoption of the renewed foreign policy concept of the Russian Federation, which is an extraordinary instrument never existing before. I think you read it, you know about it, and you heard our commentaries regarding it. But I think it's 100% for me the event of the year. An important event was the holding of the second Russia-Africa summit in St. Petersburg, the growth of the BRICS entity. This was also a quite bright event. Just soon, from the 1st of January 2024, less than 2 weeks away, in just 2 weeks, Russia will become chair of BRICS. In my opinion, according to my emotions, we see a key breaking point that we are witnessing in our standoff with the West. This key breaking point is can be witnessed everywhere on the ground, there where our soldiers with weapons in their hands are trying to proving that we are right and that our position is right, and with their lives they are executing the concept of the foreign policy that was adopted this year. This is felt in the behavior and the steadfastness of the world community. We see this in international arenas, in international summits, in international conferences. We can see it in the publications even of the politically motivated Western media, which are completely at a loss due to the fact that they realized what they've gotten themselves into. This is clearly seen everywhere. We see it and feel it, but and of course, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sergei Lavrov, will give his evaluations of the outcomes during his traditional press conference, which is scheduled for the beginning of next year. We'll inform you on the exact schedule. Thank you very much. I will not congratulate you with the upcoming new year yet, because we'll have another briefing next week. We'll have another briefing next week. Yes, of course. We have common friends. You know that they love you in Bulgaria, and this situation with Madam Mitrofanova is the exception. We also mentioned that Jews and Palestinians are both Semitic peoples, and this conflict has no exact sense. But Mr. Borrell mentioned the jungle and the blooming garden. Jungle and blooming garden. There is a word, Zionism and Zionists. It's mentioned in the framework of the Soviet ideology, for example. Perhaps we could use this word during this situation where this jungle is being rooted out and tens of thousands of people killed. I think that we need to stop juggling words and stop doing double standards. If human rights exist, they exist with every person, not any select nationality, ethnicity. If we care for children, then we need to protect all children, regardless of the blood in their veins. You know, I already mentioned it, perhaps not from this podium, but I will allow myself to say the following. I suggest the entire world to go through a very quick and free test on nationalism, if you are subjected to it or not. Ask yourself a question. To feel compassion for a suffering child, do you need to know his ethnicity? If yes, you're sick. Moving on, moving forward, thank you very much. Do we have Al-Mayadin with us? Yes, yes. Greetings. What does Russia feel about the growing U.S. presence in the Red Sea? Does this have anything to do with the visit of the President Putin to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates? I already commented on this issue today. Just recently I answered a similar question, and I don't have anything to add to it when it comes to answering your question, which is quite similar. Thank you. Thank you. I can only say that when it comes to the growing presence of the United States in the Red Sea, I would like to add something to what I've already said. Any presence must have a goal and a result. We saw how the United States grew the presence in the entire region. They were attacking countries, sovereign states, entire regions. They were interfering in internal affairs of states. They were organizing color revolutions, or they shipped weapons to some countries, manipulated conflicts in some areas of the world. We saw what the result of that was. Not a single time in the recent years there was a situation where United States presence led to the alleviation situation in a certain region. It only led to the aggravation of escalation. And old conflicts burned anew every time. We see now the growing presence of the United States in different aspects, both military and financial, for example. They used hybrid schemes to try to end old crisis. We saw the results of that horrible crisis that began on October 7th and has no prospect of its speediest de-escalation. We're just trying not to allow this crisis to extend further, and we're doing everything in our power not to let this happen. And so this question should be treated on the basis of projecting goals. Will this give any result? Will this give stability, more security? Will this settle the crisis, or will this only end in some dubious results, as it usually does? Thank you. Is Tverskaya 13 with us right now? Yes. Good afternoon. The Russian ambassador to Switzerland said that Russia will not participate in the yearly meeting of the World Economic Forum in Davos in 2024. Please tell us what is the reason for this decision. Once again, the Russian invitation was not sent invitations by the organizers of the forum. Honestly speaking, we weren't really sorry about that. We didn't lose anything from that. On the contrary, I think the reputation damage is primarily within the forum. Yearly, we are holding a St. Petersburg Economic Forum. In 2023, there were more than 70,000 participants from 130 countries on the forum against the backdrop of the so-called isolation of our country. I'll also remind you about the Eastern Economic Forum, on the Krasnoyarsk Economic Forum, Yalta International Economic Forum, Forum of Open Innovations, the Russian Energy Week, the International Exhibition Forum Russia. Yeah. We organize a lot of international economic events with the participation of countries that don't want to be subjected to some segregation lines and legal sanctions. We have a lot of opportunities to have a discussion with our partners, to have a mutually respectful cooperation regarding the key issues of economy, investments, and the improvement of multifaceted cooperation.
Thank you. That's all for us. Thank you. Vmester, newspaper of compatriots, please. Hello, Ms. Zakharova. We have two questions for you. The New Year and Christmas are approaching, and we have information that the German Customs Service warned that they might confiscate Christmas and New Year presents that are sent from Russia, and even books and toys might be seized at the border crossing checkpoints. What's your opinion about that, and can we take a responsive action so that Russia could seize and confiscate presents sent from unfriendly countries? The current situation in Germany reminds me of the movie about Grinch. I think that Germany is shooting a sequel to this movie. The second movie about Grinch, or third, fourth, or fifth, or 23rd movie. It's absurd, and it's a total mental disorder, ridiculous statement. The German government has become totally ridiculous at the world stage. There are many kinds of deviations, probably they like it, but again, we have a question for German citizens. Are they okay that with the actions of their government? Do you have any more questions? Voice of the Fatherland, please. Hello, Ms. Zakharova. We have a question, and it is again about the Soviet Union. Since the Soviet Union was a sovereign state, and it could effectively counter the collective West led by the United States, and it had a sovereign economy and state bank, and had the right to emit its own money that was linked to the state assets and not to foreign currency, and the West was very reserved and careful because the Soviet nuclear missiles were pointing towards American cities until 1994. So the question is, the Soviet Union was dismembered by the West after we became colonially dependent, or we became colonially dependent after its dismemberment. You know, I find it funny that you are trying to make me responsible for everything that happened at that time, but I was a little child. If you are asking about my knowledge of literature and history, then I think it is up to scholars and scientists to answer these questions, because such kind of discussions should be carried out at historical venues. I liked many things, especially when it comes to how the state of the Soviet Union was organized. There were so many remarkable things. The VDNH at that time demonstrated real achievements of the national economy, and it is a great thing that this practice is being reestablished today against the background of so many positive and useful things, everything that you listed, and people know about them and read about them in student books. They're watching films about it. There is one irrefutable fact: with all the correct and useful things that the Soviet Union represented, it doesn't exist today. Even with the external influence, it didn't have an opportunity to respond. I wouldn't like to recall it because it is a tragic historical event. But this is what your question is about. Thank you. But I have another question for you. Again, it's a follow-up on the first question. Is Russia the only country that is colonially dependent on the United States, or are we talking about all former countries of the Soviet Union? You, as a representative of the foreign ministry, should know about it. So, is Russia the only country that is colonially dependent on the United States? I think I need to think about it and to read about it, to have a discussion with you, and I will answer later. Irna, are you there? Yes. Hello? Ms. Zakharova. We're talking about an agreement of cooperation between Iran and Russia. When this document will be agreed on, because we're looking forward to its signing. We're thoroughly working on the document, and we're finishing its elaboration. And we will be able to inform you later, and we will share all the details with you, but later. Thank you. Do you have any more questions? Then, farewell to you. I wish you prosperity, and see you next time. It will be the last briefing of 2023. Please prepare your questions, and maybe take into account that this meeting will be on the New Year's Eve. Probably there will be some New Year questions. And I would like to add to what I've just said. I would like to confirm that the text of the Russia-Iranian Treaty on the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership is almost ready, and we hope to sign this important document during one of the contacts at the highest level, and this event will become an important milestone in the bilateral relationship between our two countries. Thank you for your attention, and see you next time. Take care.